Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our Department Deep Dive webinar series, where we're going to focus on the transactions department today. I think we can get the next slide. Perfect. Okay. So I'll quickly go over our agenda. We're going to talk about an overview of the practice group, transactions highlight, and then we'll end with a panel. A few housekeeping items. Obviously, y'all are muted with your cameras turned off. Please use the chat feature if you have any questions for us. Me and Quinn will be monitoring that throughout the webinar. And yes, we will let Joe kick us off with introducing the panelists.
Hi, good evening, everybody. We're super excited to talk to you all about our transactions group. We've got a member of each of our practice areas within our transactions group, and we'll get into a little detail about how that breaks down in a minute. But to start with introductions, my name is Joe O'Connell. I'm a senior associate in the Dallas office. I work in the real estate industry practice group. I've been at V&E for I guess 8 years if you count my summer after my 2L year. So really don't know any other law firm, and it's been great. I did my law school at SMU, and I'm a Dallas native. And if you're thinking that my background doesn't look like Dallas, like Sarah's and Luke, that's because I'm happen to be in the New York office this week. So with that, Luke, you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Luke Strieber. I am a senior associate in the Dallas office where it's bright out, and I'm in the private M&As where I specialize in the corporate group with SMU for law school. And so, yeah, I'll handle any questions about what the corporate group is today.
Daisy, how about you?
So, hi everyone, I'm Daisy DeWolf. I'm a fifth year finance associate in our New York office, and I'm jealous of Luke and Sarah's sunlight right now. Joe, I was thinking it was too dark out for you to be in Dallas. I was born and raised in New York, and I'm a graduate of Fordham Law. And at V&E, my practice specializes in the financing of renewable energy projects. So happy to handle any questions about that or a broader finance practice group.
Hi, and I will wrap it up. My name is Sarah Zogelman. I am a fifth year in our restructuring and reorganization practice here in the Dallas office. I too graduated from SMU Law School and came straight through. I will be starting my sixth year here in January. It doesn't quite feel like it. Yeah, I think that's enough about me. We want to get on with it, Joe?
Yeah, James, you can flip to the next slide. Thanks to all of our panelists for joining this evening. On this slide, you'll see a breakdown of the different practice groups within the firm of Vincent & Elkins. So each law firm does this a little differently. So always a great question to ask or read up on before going into an interview is, how is your firm structured? Because the number of practice areas within law these days is innumerable. So V&E has three main practice groups: tax, executive compensation and benefits, litigation and regulatory, and transactions. And transactions is what we'll be focused on today. These numbers or percentages represent the number of attorneys by group. So V&E, a little bit over half is represented by the transactions group. So within transactions, we've got, all of the groups that our panelists said about, corporate, finance, real estate industry, and restructuring and reorganization. Those are representative of a lot of different offices within V&E. So for example, real estate industry, we've got a group in Dallas and we've got a group in our New York City office. We often work cross office, so I'll get pulled into New York deals. A New Yorker might pull me in on Texas deals, and we'll also work cross practice too. So all of us have some level of familiarity with each other's groups. Like Luke might call me up for an M&A deal or a private equity deal that has a real estate component. James, we can head to the next slide. And so now I'm going to kick it back to our panelists to talk a little bit more in detail about their specific practice areas. Luke, you want to kick us off with corporate?
Sure. It's probably a little unfair that we've, been slicing the legal world this way, and then I'll start with corporate, which again, I'll slice again. Corporate is probably, it has the most attorneys, and it's also the most vague word to describe a group. We used to be called something else. We change names every few years to keep it fresh, but corporate is basically, um, in my mind, three main buckets, although there are plenty of other things you can do with it. It's the M&A, which is mergers, acquisitions. They can be private or public, joint ventures, private equity. We do a bunch of venture capital, kind of growth equity investments. And so that kind of encapsulates part of the M&A practice. There's also capital markets, which probably people are most familiar with, like IPOing a company. But there's also debt offerings, notes, convertible securities, SPACs, REITs, MLPs, and generally helping boards and C-suite executives with the day-to-day governance of a company. And then there's the funds practice, which is taking and helping funds raise capital from various investors. And at least at V&E, when you join the corporate group, you get experience with everything. And then after several years of working, you can kind of like pick your slice of corporate that you want. But that's generally, those three buckets are the overview. But you just kind of get thrown in and say, if you get an M&A deal, great. If you get a capital markets deal, great. Funds work, awesome. Then it takes you 2 or 3 years to figure out what you want to do. But that's kind of the general overview of what corporate is.
Thanks, Luke. Daisy, would you tell us a little bit about finance?
Sure, happy to do that. So, as Luke kind of alluded to, there was a little bit of a transactional department shuffle at the end of last year. And so, what we now call our finance group used to be two groups. One, which was called Energy Transactions and Projects, which is the group I was a part of when I joined V&E, and then our traditional finance group, which we kind of merged into. And so now this broader finance group really straddles both areas, which is kind of traditional finance, so representing borrowers and lenders, borrowing money and managing financial liabilities in a broad range of transactions, but then also the financing of projects, which can be energy projects, which, as I mentioned earlier, is my area of specialty, or different types of infrastructure projects. We're working a lot on data centers right now. So what we now call finance is a group that really covers a lot of different areas of a broad finance practice. And we have lawyers, I think, in each of our offices now, as the slides mention, in Dallas, in Denver, in Houston, in LA, in New York, and Washington. And so finance lawyers at V&E lead structuring and negotiating debt financing transactions. I also work a lot on tax equity transactions, which is a different type of finance. And so we will represent borrowers, we'll represent lenders, we'll represent sponsors in tax equity transactions, and draft the main deliverables, which might be credit agreements or security agreements or guarantees. But we might also be tapped into an M&A deal by Luke to be the subject matter experts on any sort of finance relating matters to an M&A transaction or capital markets, or even on restructuring deals as well. So we kind of touch on pretty much all of our transactional practices within the firm.
Great, thank you. And I'll talk a little bit about our real estate industry group, which similarly, like the finance group, was recently shuffled around a little bit to be composed of traditional real estate, which is really my area of expertise, and that kind of involves what you think it would. It's buying, selling, leasing, and financing real property. We pretty much operate exclusively in the commercial space, which is office buildings, warehouse buildings, industrial buildings, multifamily, which is your typical residential apartment complex, and also some retail spaces, restaurants, shopping malls, things like that. So our traditional real estate practice, what some people might call like dirt law, is, taking a piece of land from a vacant lot to a new office building, leasing it to tenants, getting a loan to operate it, and then eventually selling it. Um, so we really handle all aspects of commercial real estate transactions. And I like kind of seeing that life cycle of an asset. The other aspect of the real estate industry practice involves a lot of work from our securities lawyers who are advising ownerships of real estate investment vehicles and securities offerings, a lot of real estate investment trust work, commonly referred to as a REIT, which you may have seen on our website or, in your research of different law firms. And like the finance group, we'll also act as subject matter experts for corporate finance, other transactions where there's a real estate component that they need a real estate lawyer to look at. Sarah, you want to tell us about restructuring?
Sure. So restructuring is a little bit different than the other transactional groups. And actually, our group, while it is transactional, it is a hybrid. So it's half transactional and half litigation. And this is because we are the fixers of things. And so when you have a company who is going through financial distress, a lot of times we will come in and we will represent them and help them find a way out of that. We'll help them solve their problems. That may be an out of court restructuring where you are negotiating their credit agreements, for example. You're negotiating with their suppliers or their lenders, or that strategy, that problem solving may require a Chapter 11 filing in a bankruptcy court. And that's where the litigation side of things come into play. So it can be a little bit of both. And we don't just represent the financially distressed companies themselves. We will also represent creditors on the other side of that, the creditors of the financially distressed company. And that could be the banks and the lenders, including the private equity and credit funds. Also, other creditors that we commonly represent are landlords. So we do also a lot of cross practice group work. So when we're representing landlords, we do a lot of work with the real estate group. When we're representing companies, we do a lot of cross practice group work with really every practice group. If you think about the guts of a company, every single thing is implicated, whether it be tax, finance, executive and compensation and benefits, real estate, so on and so forth. So it's a hybrid of practices. And we have our practice group is out of the Houston office, the New York office, and the Dallas office. And we work heavily cross office with each other. And so a great example right now is a lot of the deals that I'm working on or cases that I'm working on are actually under the New York team, as part of the New York team. So it's not uncommon for us to be working outside of our office.
Thanks, Sarah. And James, if you'll go to the next slide. This is a breakdown of a subset of the last breakdown. So this is how the different practice areas within the transactions group break out by lawyer. The corporate group, by far the largest group, and you see the numbers for the balance of the groups there. My 2 cents, good question to ask and research when you're looking at firms. I mean, like with going to a law school or a college, like, do I want a bigger group? Do I want a smaller group? And this slide here gives you a little bit of an idea of how things work within the transactions group at V&E. And with the next slide, we can start turning things over to the panel. And we'll go through a couple basic questions that might be of interest to our audience. And I think I'll pose these to our panel, and whoever feels compelled to jump in can take one. But if the silence stretches on too long, I'll probably cold call somebody. And Luke looks like he's ready to go. So first question for our panel, what types of training did you receive as an associate?
Yeah, I can kick it off. There's lots of formal training. You will start, and whether it's in our program or when you actually start as a full-fledged attorney, There's trainings like this. There's trainings that our teams put together. There's PowerPoints, and you get taught a lot of the things that you don't learn in law school. I think it's kind of a unique situation for a transactional group in that if you start day one at a law firm and get asked a litigation question, hey, can you write me a memo? I have a question about law. Can you give me an answer? You should have 3 years of expertise that you can draw on and how to answer that question and get them an answer in a format and cited how you know have been trained to do it. But day one in a transactions group, or at least the corporate group, you're not expected to know anything. You're not expected to have studied it in law school. No one's going to slap a merger agreement on your desk and tell you to mark it up. It's going to be very spoon fed, and training is very, very important because we understand that not a lot of law schools come out and give a lot of transactional training. So we really try to pack in the first, your quote unquote stub year. If you start in, September or October, with a lot of trainings and a lot of, it's not the classroom. I think, once you graduate law school, you're kind of, should be done with that. But it's a lot of, hey, here's what it is, learn it, take notes. So there's a lot of formal training. On the other hand, I think where you learn the most and the quickest and most efficiently is the informal training, which is you just get put on a deal, and you just start going. And there's no exact framework for what a deal looks like, and you've got to adjust. You get asked to do little assignments and save the system, and a lot of times you don't know what you're doing, but you get to watch the process, and you get to watch the attorneys that are more senior than you, that have been doing this a long time. It's something that you don't learn in law school, is email style or interactions with clients, or I think a lot of what the panelists have said is like a lot of a corporate group does is spin out assignments to various specialist groups when we need input. And I'm not going to pretend to know, there's a lot of real estate involved with this deal. And I can say, okay, I don't know that. Joe, can you help me out here? And so just watching the process without actually, and through the process, you'll turn in an assignment, or someone will pull you aside and say, hey, this is why we did this. But really, I think the most effective training is just sitting there on an email chain, on calls, and watching people do the job, almost like an apprenticeship. And I think that's where I've seen the most fruitful training, is just watching what people who are good at this, extremely good at this, do and trying to emulate them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll jump in here. I agree with that. There is, a lot of formal training that can be had, but I think the most valuable training is going to be the type that you're doing on the job. Like you said, whether it's by observing or doing. But also I've learned in my experience that a lot of my training is in the form of feedback. And so I may have, done an assignment, approached an assignment, did something that was asked of me, and it's in the feedback that I receive is how, I learn from it. And that's kind of the training in some aspects. But otherwise, I agree with everything Luke said.
Building off of that, something that we've been trying to do as our new first year associates started just a couple weeks ago is really sit down with them whenever we're giving them an assignment and kind of do a mock-up of the assignment with them live, so that they have an opportunity to not only see what we mean, but also try it themselves and get feedback live. Because as Luke mentioned, we know that when you're coming into a transactional practice group, you're not coming with the law school experience that you might have if you're going into a more litigation focused practice. So everything from client interactions to just learning how to mark up even a shorter transactional document, we are making a concerted effort to sit with our new first years and really walk through an assignment and explain not just what changes would need to be made, but also why they're being made, so that going forward, as a more junior associate, the juniors feel like they can take more initiative on future assignments pretty quickly.
Yeah, and since we all have, colleagues in different offices, I'm just curious if like Luke, the formal training you're referring to, is that just Dallas, or is that sort of for all corporate first years?
I think it starts broad, right? Like, so there's a training seminar, you know, that all the first years go to across the firm to learn kind of the basics of law firm life. And then you'll do a lot of broad trainings that are for all the associates across the firm. And then kind of as you filter into your office and know the people better, the trainings become a little more tailored, a little more specific. There's some trainings that maybe the Dallas office does a lot of XYZ, the Houston office does something more of that. And so you get more tailored training as you go. And kind of like I alluded to at first, you start with such a broad array of things you could do in the corporate group, like M&A, capital markets, funds. You start with a very, very broad set of training that really is applicable to all, you know, transactional practices. And then as you kind of go throughout your career, and that's, you know, starting day 1 to year 3 to year 5 and 6 and so on, you start to realize, you know, well, as we all have, you know, specialize in a different type of or a subset of the law, or a, you know, smaller and smaller graph that we've broken down for you already. And so as you move along in your career, the trainings get more tailored to your office and to your specific area of practice.
Yeah, it's very similar for real estate. I mean, we've got formal trainings, you know, covering the basics of an office lease that everybody goes to, but you know, each client likes things differently, does things a certain way, and you can drill down on all the sorts of different issues. Um, Another question, curious about, I mean, what made each of y'all decide to join your respective groups? Sarah, do you want to take this one?
Sure, I'll kick this one off. So I don't have a perfect answer here, but I will be completely honest with y'all. I had absolutely no idea what practice group I wanted to join. I did my second summer at V&E between my second and third year of law school. At that time, we were allowed to rotate through really as many practice groups as we could. Now I think we have it limited to 3. But at that time, I rotated through 5 practice groups. And I did not have any clear idea at the end of the summer as to what I wanted to do. The only thing I knew is that I didn't want to be a litigator, which is ironic because I landed in the only transactional practice group that actually does litigation. But that's okay because I've very much enjoyed my time here in restructuring and reorganization. And I think a big reason why it wasn't necessarily on my radar is because, you know, we didn't have, I mean, the exact reason that we're all here today, right? We didn't have a lot of education on it in law school. Law school is very litigation focused. And so I don't think I even realized that this was a practice group, that this was something that I could have done. In my head, it was M&A or finance, right? That's kind of all I knew at the time. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that I chose my practice group. I think it kind of chose me. And I joined the firm in 2020 during the COVID year. And as you may all know, it was a very, very busy year for bankruptcies and financial distress. And so I was brought on during a very busy time. It was drinking through a fire hose, but it was really great, and I'm still enjoying it. So.
My piece of advice when picking practice groups, and I think the summer, you know, associate program does a good job of it, is it's about the work that you want to do, but and you get a flavor for the 3 weeks that you rotate through groups, or you know, however long you are, you can kind of get a sense of the type of work you do. But I think as important, if not more important, is the people that you're working with. And so to a certain extent, the summer program allows you to meet the people that you would be working with in the different groups. And just like, you know, your different friend groups have different personalities, different groups have different personalities, not one better than the other, just different. And you can, you know, kind of tell, oh, maybe I'm a loud person, this group's quieter, I'm a quiet person, this group's louder. This group, you know, this, that, and the other, whatever you are looking for in a group, And so I think, in the interview process for firms and the process once you join a firm to find a practice group, I would encourage you to put as much emphasis on, the type of people you're going to be working with, that you interact with. Put as much emphasis on that as you do what type of work you think you want to do.
I think it might be helpful to jump in here because I was a summer associate in our New York office, and we actually do things a little bit differently. So, unlike in Dallas, we do not have a formal rotation system, but summer associates are still encouraged to work for each practice group. So, when I came to V&E, I actually knew that I was interested in our transactional energy practice, and my summer associate experience just reaffirmed that interest for me. But I did make sure to accept work from each practice group, which in New York, that's what you can do. You can go around to the different groups and ask for work from anyone and just make sure that you get experience working across all of the groups. And I really liked everyone I worked with in the group that we used to call ETP, which is now our finance group. And I liked the people. And so it ended up being a really good fit. But I also, just because we don't have the formal rotation doesn't mean that you're not encouraged to work across all of the groups and make sure that, for example, that reaffirmed my decision that I didn't want to work on our litigation groups, but that's okay. I got the experience and I got to try it. So just wanted to note that things are a little bit different in our New York office.
Yeah, speaking of that, I mean, we all work cross cross office. I mean, do you see any like noticeable difference in work styles, workflows, like work culture between or among V&E's offices? And I'm happy to speak to that too, because I have gotten a lot of experience with the New York office over the past week or so. Um, I mean, I think V&E is a pretty good culture firm wide, and I don't really see much of a difference in my interactions working with New York or with Houston. Um, I think in terms of workflow, it's much more practice area based, the differences. Um, like we're the New York real estate group and the Dallas real estate group tend to work about the same, I would say. Slightly different clients, slightly different deals, but still V&E culture, and we try to mesh as much as possible. I don't know if y'all have much experience with that you're willing to speak on.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So for the restructuring group, as I had mentioned before, we work cross office very heavily. And so I would say that the workflow among our offices and the work culture among the three offices that the restructuring group is in is very similar. Um, and I think part of that is because when a new matter comes in the door, for example, it's not, okay, we're going to staff this with people from the New York team. It's, okay, we're going to staff this with people from the restructuring team, and it's probably going to include 1 to 2 people from each office. So the way that we work, it's similar, kind of wherever we are. I'll echo Joe's point that I think the workflow and work culture is going to differ among from practice group to practice group, more so than from office to office, at least from my impression. And I'll let Luke or Daisy correct me. But yeah, that's my perspective.
Just here to echo the sentiment, I do a lot of my work across office as well, mostly with our Denver and Los Angeles offices, and it definitely feels like we're just part of one big team, and it doesn't matter that the partners I'm working with are in another office. And staffing is really just based on deal specific needs and who has capacity, but not, as Sarah said, oh, let's just get a bunch of people in New York. It might be that I'm on a deal with a mid-level in LA and a junior in Denver, and it works just great.
Yeah, same. I think that the differences are more driven by the client and or the person, the partner that's on the deal. In my experience, it's not, oh, if you get on a Houston deal, it doesn't matter the partner, it's going to be this way. If you're on Dallas, you're in New York, you're out of this, area. It's, there are differences in work styles and work cultures on, a client might be more demanding, or a client might give more lead time or ask more questions. And that can change the dynamic of a deal, but that's not to say like, oh, you go to Houston and it's this way, you go to Dallas and it's this way, New York it's this way. There are differences, but they're not driven by the location of the person who is that you're staffed with.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah, I'm glad y'all feel the same way. I don't get to see y'all's internal actions, interactions within the practice groups. What would you say your day-to-day looks like? The typical restructuring, corporate finance, day-to-day to-do list is? Daisy, you want to kick this one off?
Sure. I'll walk through today, I guess, because it's top of mind. So my first priority today, and kind of my top priority, was sending out investment documents on behalf of one of our biggest clients. And so my morning started out with I sent something to a partner late last night, and he called me this morning with some feedback. And so that necessitated a couple of rounds of back and forth with our client where I got to go back to her. We had a call about an environmental issue that she wanted to discuss before we sent the documents out. That required us to reach out to our environmental specialist. So, just an example of us working across groups on really all of our matters. Got her feedback, had another call about the matter, and actually, like 5 minutes before I got on this panel, sent the documents out, which was a huge relief because they've been on my plate for a couple of weeks now. So really, I'd say the typical day-to-day as a finance associate, especially as you get to be a mid-level and more senior, is you're balancing a couple of deals at a time, handling investment documents and going back and forth with clients, and then really just chasing down issues as they arise, which might be a matter of reaching out to specialists within V&E or working with your junior associates to kind of trace things down and tie them out. And something that is cool and exciting is being the one to be the point person for the client and to be able to walk them through why we do or don't care about an issue and how we're going to resolve it. And so, of course, every day is different, but I would say that the main feature in the day-to-day as a finance lawyer is going back and forth with clients about these lending-based investment documents.
I can go next. So if we're just going based on today, and with the preface that every day looks a little bit different, excuse me, every day looks a little bit different. But today I spent a good majority of my time reviewing work from juniors. I reviewed a research memo. I also reviewed a motion that was drafted by one of our juniors, and I just provided some comments and feedback to that. I also spent some time doing research of my own to make sure that, we had covered all the bases that we needed in the research memo that I mentioned. I sat on a few calls and participated in a few calls, one with a client, another with counsel for another creditor that we're working with in a case that I'm on. And I also spent some time in a partner's office catching up on our deals that we're staffed on together. And I think that's kind of it for today. So today was relatively simple. Tomorrow could look a lot different, but that's tomorrow's problem.
Yeah, I agree. I think more so than litigation, this is overgeneralizing, but I think that litigators would agree. The transactions group is a little more, a negative spin would be unpredictable. A good spin would be dynamic. Each day is different. You can't really expect, what you can do the next day. Clients might ask for something. You might get documents back from the other side. You don't know when, but usually, it's a mix of maybe a couple calls that you're either internal or with a client to discuss documents. Maybe you have 3 or 4 things going on. So in between the calls, you can mark up a document or draft or revise or work with specialists to get their feedback on something that you need. And so there's a, general roadmap of the day, but I would say, from day to day, it's hard even to look 24 hours ahead and know what I will be doing at, 3 p.m. tomorrow. It's pretty just kind of answering questions as they come up, doing what you need to do to move things along. And then I will say, like, your job changes as your first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and what you will be doing changes, and your responsibilities will change. And so, there's never a dull moment, and you're always trying to kind of learn the next phase of your job so that you figure out how to be a great junior associate. And they say, okay, now you know enough about the deal, you're going to be running it, and you're going to be the one, talking specialist, getting everything together, and responding to the client. So it changes day to day, it changes year to year. I know that's kind of a cop out answer, but it varies a lot.
Yeah, I think, my days are very similar to y'all's. It's a lot of variety, a lot of different types of deals. So like I'm working on a joint venture transaction for a new project in Uptown Dallas. I'm had a few calls with some corporate associates to go over some real estate issues on a bigger stock purchase. Did some leasing matters. A client had some questions on a loan agreement. So it's that variety that I think keeps it really fresh for me. And like y'all said, it's like today could be something entirely different. There's always a new problem to solve, which I, think makes this job really rewarding. Um, and there's a lot of that. Yeah, Luke, I like how you said unpredictability if you're thinking of it negatively, but it keeps things exciting and um, makes the days go by fast, that's for sure. Uh, so one of the questions I also wanted to ask, and I think we might have similar answers to this, but what is something that you've seen, or is there a particular skill that makes attorneys in your practice area particularly successful? So for example, like in the real estate group, and this is why I think we might have similar answers, is like a big thing for us is attention to detail. I mean, that matters when you're looking at a survey of a site that a client wants to build an office building on, you know, no matter how small the detail, if it's a tiny little utility line that's running over the property, that matters. And that's something that we're expected to pay attention to and keep track of. Curious if y'all have any other skills or habits or characteristics that you find particularly valuable.
Yeah, I would say, sorry, Daisy, did you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, I'll be quick. I mean, obviously, yes, attention to detail. I think that's pretty universal. And also, I would add that, kind of learning from your mistakes and not making the same mistake twice. Obviously, it's okay to make mistakes. That's part of, being a junior, being a first year. That's part of the learning process. But the key there is to learn from it, and to not make the mistake again. So that is one skill or thing that I really recognize in junior associates, and one that I work on myself every day. I always have, and I will continue to do that even as a mid-level senior and higher. And then it kind of goes hand in hand, but also just as a junior, as a first year, really taking ownership to the things that you can do and you can control. And I think a good example of this is when it comes to work product, for example. While you may not be exactly sure whether the substance of the work product is correct, or if you directly hit the mark, you can be sure that the work product is clean and that there aren't typos and there are not errors in the grammar or punctuation or anything like that. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with attention to detail.
Jumping in here, I would say trying to get exposure to as many different types of transactions as possible. Within the finance group, you can kind of divide our group into traditional finance, so that's debt finance, and then also tax equity financing. But the thing is, even though they're different financing structures, a lot of the issues are intertwined. And so the most successful financing attorneys would get experience doing all different types of financing transactions. So not just projects, but also leverage finance, acquisition finance, etc. So that if an issue comes across in one deal that you would not be as familiar with, if that's the only type of deal you've done, you'd be able to actually sort of trace that down without having to go to another person within the group. So I would say definitely would recommend getting as much exposure to as many different areas of your practice as possible.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would add what it's not is being so knowledgeable about a niche area of law that you can overrule partners and catch their mistakes. Like you come in, and I think generally what makes a good associate, not to speak for the other groups, but it's all within your control. It's, hopefully that's a little comforting to know that, like, I think, if I could build a great, junior associate, they're hardworking and responsive, good attention to detail, good attitude when asked to do things, things like that. I think something that you don't have to have come in with a lot of preparation, a lot of knowledge. I think that becomes important, as you learn and grow and not make the same mistakes twice. But day one, I again, you're not expected to be, super knowledgeable about any aspect of your transactional group. It's really like, am I eager to learn? Do I work hard? Do I, ask the right questions? Do I come to people with questions that I seem like I am knowledgeable about, that I've looked into myself, or, is it a lazy question? But it's all things that I think anyone can do, anyone can control, and anyone can kind of ratchet up or ratchet down, how much they, want to make a career out of it.
Yeah, well said, Luke. And I think turning to sort of what our attendees can start to think about now and do now, I mean, would you have any advice to somebody looking to explore your practice area that they can put into place now? I mean, do you recommend the certain law school classes, things like that?
Yeah, I would say that I mean, it can be very common for somebody in the restructuring group to do a clerkship before they come in, a clerkship with the bankruptcy court. Of course, I'm fully recognizing we're in the transactional kind of seminar here. So maybe ignore that. I didn't do a clerkship. I did not think it was necessary. Also did not think I would be doing any type of litigation. But I would recommend, if anybody's interested in the restructuring and reorganization group, I would recommend taking a creditor's rights class or even secure transactions class in law school. I think some law schools, at least at SMU, they also offered more specific bankruptcy courses over Chapter 11, for instance, which is like the bankruptcy chapter for corporations and businesses to file. So that would be what my advice for people interested in restructuring.
Yeah. I think from a real estate perspective, I took a real estate transactions course in law school. It was sort of helpful for what I do now. But it's definitely not required or mandatory. I mean, like Luke referenced earlier, I mean, the kind of expectation is you come in not knowing what you're doing. Um, I think the basic property concepts are what you learn in your 1L property course, and you're kind of set. I think what's even more valuable, and this is not real estate perspective specific, but any class that offers like practical contract drafting experience. I know at SMU there was an advanced contracts drafting class, and that was certainly more helpful than real estate transactions because that was my first exposure to reading some of the contracts that I review on a day-to-day basis now.
I agree with Joe. Fordham had a couple of contract drafting classes, which were extremely helpful because they were the only exposure that I had within law school to actually trying to draft simple transactional contracts. So it's difficult to get experience in law school that will translate well to your day-to-day practice in big law, but definitely some sort of contract drafting class, if it's offered by your school, I would definitely recommend trying that out and to see if you like that kind of transactional drafting.
Yeah, I agree. I think I had like a weekend anatomy of a deal course. I can't say that I came in much more prepared because of it, but I knew what an MAE what stood for at least. No one knows what it actually is, but I knew it stood for something. Uh, I think if the two questions would be like, is there a class that I should take so that I know more coming in and I'm not behind? I I don't know that that's necessarily the case. If you're looking to which classes should I take to see if this is something I'm interested in, I think a tax class, securities law, some corporate leaning classes would be helpful to kind of get a flavor of it. Um, but I wouldn't say that there's if you haven't taken XYZ class, or if you're not a pro at, rule against perpetuities, you can't join the real estate practice group. There's no, or even like your undergrad degree in college. Like, I don't know that anyone is super looking at whether it was a finance or a philosophy degree. There's plenty of philosophy majors in the corporate group. There's plenty of, you know, finance majors in the litigation group. So it's ultimately something that I think you should seek out corporate classes to see if it's something you want to do. But ultimately, I think if you have the choice between a corporate class or a class that you're really interested in, I would take the class you're really interested in. It'll be more fun.
Yeah, totally agreed. So, taking a step back, setting aside what we've discussed about practice groups, can each of you speak about what drew you to V&E as a firm and our summer associate program?
I can take this one. The people. It's a cop out again, and each firm will probably tell you something similar about how they have great culture. I think Vini, for me, it came down to mostly the people. It's a Texas-based firm. I think our culture is unique in that we do the most sophisticated work you can do, and we do it with the biggest clients, and we're across from the biggest firms. But no one's storming around the office yelling at people and being a monster. It's a Texas-based firm, and I think that kind of personality permeates even into New York and the other offices. And so it's the people. I think Vini does a good job of operating in Texas and nationally. And so it was big enough that I spend a decent amount of time in New York, or a lot of the client work we get is out of New York. And so it's a touch point to a major financial hub. But I get to kind of have this a little more laid back culture. I mean, that's not to say we don't get the job done, and you're expected to, but there's different ways to go about it rather than being a monster. And so I was drawn mostly to that, and the people I met along the way and process and through events like this.
Yeah, of course, the people, I agree. The one thing that really stuck out to me about V&E, which, in retrospect, I'm so glad that I focused on it, but at the time it was kind of a random thing for me to focus on. And as a reminder, I joined the firm in 2020, so I was going through recruitment around 2018, 2019. Did my summer here in 2019, and I remember somebody once telling me, or I read somewhere in a presentation like this, that during the '08 crash, V&E did not lay off one attorney. And when I heard that, I don't know why, but I was like, oh, that's actually very impressive. I mean, I was, not very old during the '08 crash, but I, know enough that to know that it was terrible and a lot of people lost their jobs. Um, and so that was one of the things that really stuck out to me when I chose V&E. Little did I know that that was going to be actually very important, because when I joined in 2020, it was around the same time that a lot of my classmates were getting their offers revoked from their summer programs, because COVID was doing enough damage on a lot of law firms that they were no longer able to hire, first years. And I never had a concern that, or I was never worried that V&E was going to revoke my offer. And again, it's kind of a weird little data point, but it's something that ended up being extremely important for me.
I'll just reiterate the people. That was definitely the decisive factor for me through the recruitment process. I knew I was interested in B&E's energy practice, but every interview that I had and every interaction that I had with an attorney at B&E just made me feel really confident in my decision to accept my offer as a summer associate. And then during my experience as a summer associate at B&E, I was so impressed by the people and also by the quality of work that I was able to do as a summer associate that I was just so happy that this is where I was starting my career. And now, almost 6 years in, I agree with everything that everyone said. The people really have been the shining point for me at B&E.
Yeah, I think that was a big factor for me as well. And really the high level and quality of work was a big factor for me too. And not just the fact that the firm does it, but you as a junior associate get to meaningfully participate in it. And that was really important to me coming into the practice of law, knowing that I didn't know anything, was will I get to participate and get meaningful work experience early, or will I, be stuck in a closet for 4 years looking at diligence files? And I think the firm is very committed to getting junior associates meaningful work experience as soon as possible. And that's, drafting real legal documents, talking directly to clients. And that was a huge selling point for me. Uh, so unless anybody in our panel wants to tack on anything else, that kind of concludes what I wanted to go through, and we'll turn it back over to Grace with the next slide. Thanks everybody for joining. It was a lot of fun, and hopefully I can speak for all of us when I say we hope to see y'all in person sometime.
Yes,
Absolutely.
thank y'all so much. Thank you to our panelists for taking the time to do this webinar today. Just a few reminders. One, our application opens on November 1st, so make sure and apply. And then later this week, on tomorrow, we have our litigation and regulatory department series, and then our tax, executive compensation, and benefits department series on Thursday. So make sure and tune into those if you'd like to know more. But thank y'all. Have a good rest of your night.